In this series of videos, we're going to learn the differences in the reproductive process behind normal cells, what we call somatic cells, and the differences that occur in the production of gametes, more commonly called sex cells. For those that don't remember what the gametes are, male gametes are sperm that carry the DNA of the father, and the female gametes are the eggs which carry the DNA of the mother. And any organism that produces an offspring consisting of both male DNA and female DNA are what we call sexual reproducers, or use sexual reproduction to produce offspring. Now, not every organism does this. If we take a look at very simple, more primitive organisms such as bacteria, they undergo a process of reproduction that we call asexual reproduction, where a single bacterial cell basically doubles in size and duplicates its DNA in basically an identical copy, except for mutations here and there. And the result of this are two daughter cells that are effectively genetically identical because they share the DNA of the single parent that they had. You can technically think of these offspring as clones of each other because, again, their DNA is identical. But in sexual reproduction, because sexual reproduction requires the DNA from a father and a mother, this is not the case. So in this video, we're going to look at the advantages sexual reproduction has over asexual reproduction, starting with the idea that sexual partners have a greater degree of choice over possible mates, and this concept is what we call sexual selection, which is the ability of both male and female partners within the sexual partnership to actually pick and choose. Obviously, bacteria can't do this because bacteria reproduce without sexual partners. It's only a single cell that divides in order to produce other cells. And depending on what the organism is, different organisms will have different methods of sexual selection. We can see that these elk and this pair of rhinoceros beetles are undergoing something that we call courtship fights, in which two organisms that are competing mates for another sexual partner, usually males of the species, compete in a struggle for dominance, whereas a lot of the time this is much less directly competitive. One example being birds that compete with each other indirectly, where the bird with the best bird song has the greatest likelihood of wooing a mate, and with visual displays such as those used by peacocks. And of course, humans are relatively unique because we can use a combination of all of these factors to favor our sexual selective process. Now, the advantage of this, the advantage of having a greater choice of reproductive mates, means that we have greater opportunity to randomize the sperm and egg that are combined in order to produce gametes, and this results overall in a much greater genetic diversity within the species. And again, this is not just true with humans as well. If we think of a rather extreme example like dogs, technically every single one of these different dog breeds is actually the same species, meaning that if we take a golden retriever and mate it with a terrier, these two dogs can actually successfully reproduce and produce a dog that is a combination of the two. And likewise, this goes with humans as well. But if we go back to the bacteria, this advantage does not exist because no matter how many times these daughter cells reproduce, so if they were to reproduce again, even if we have 4 bacteria, except for small mutations, they would be identical to the parent because there is no recombination of DNA, because there is no such thing as two sexual partners in an asexually reproductive relationship. Now, what this means is that because a father and a mother can only contribute 50% of their DNA in order to create their offspring, what this means is that offspring will not always inherit the same harmful alleles. So when we talk about evolution and natural selection, not all characteristics that exist give an advantage in certain situations, but the fact that mother and father only select 50% of their genome means that sexual reproduction builds in the ability to actually remove potentially detrimental traits or detrimental characteristics from a population, thereby increasing the likelihood that the offspring will not carry a disadvantage that the parents had, and thereby increasing the potential that the offspring would survive. Now, what exactly makes a characteristic harmful or detrimental? That's a conversation for us to have in the evolution unit. For now, we can simply say not all human characteristics or not all of any organism's characteristics are suitable for the environment, and sexual reproduction naturally has the ability to remove these from a population's gene pool. So in short, sexual reproduction accomplishes these through the idea of genetic recombination, which is a term that was introduced to us in the previous video. And the simplest form, the start of genetic recombination, is simply due to the fact that 50% of the DNA of an offspring comes from the biological father, and the other 50% comes from the organism's biological mother, creating a much more diverse organism that again may have more beneficial traits and fewer harmful traits than either of the parents do. And once again, all of this is due to the reliance on specialized reproductive cells that we call gametes, which are of course the sperm in biological males, and what we call the ova. This is just the scientific word for eggs in biological females. And in the next series of videos, we're going to look at the biological process that is what we call meiosis, as opposed to mitosis, and the differences in meiosis from mitosis that are necessitated by the fact that sperm and eggs only carry 50% of the DNA of the parents. And that will be the subject of the next few videos in this series.